Welcome to the Tomorrow Zone Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Rubin. This conversation is part of our Future Shaping Leaders series, inspired by my book, Enter the Tomorrow Zone: How to Inspire Breakthrough Innovation and Shape Your Future. In this series, we're exploring how senior leaders are thinking and leading while responsible for shaping the future in complex organizations and markets. So let's get into it. Today's conversation features Chris Enbom. Chris is CEO of AP Equipment Financing and AP Fleet Management, and he has spent his career helping businesses navigate growth, innovation, and change. From structuring complex global finance deals early in his career to building AP Equipment Financing into a nationally recognized organization with over $1 billion in managed assets, Chris is bringing a unique blend of strategic vision, operational leadership, and future-focused thinking. He's also a highly respected voice in the equipment finance community, recognized for his leadership and service with many honors, including ELFA's David H. Fennig Distinguished Service Award and the Stephen R. LeBaron Award. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Deborah. I really appreciate you having me on. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, me too. It's fun to collaborate this way, and we have collaborated a few times in the past. I remember back in the day when we were rewriting the CLFP handbook, 6th edition, you were one of the experts who collaborated with me on the content, and so I really appreciate that. Huge impact for so
and you
many.
did a great job, by the way, with that project. And we were in the process of both doing the handbook and also just kind of revamping really everything about the CLFP, and you came in and had a very good vision on and organizational mind on how to help us do that, and it worked out really well. And the CLFP has really gone great places, and now part of the LFA. So
it's so fun to see how that has grown over the years. And I also remember collaborating with you. I don't know if you remember this, but it was in early 2020 when the world kind of blew up, and we collaborated on one of the first industry live streams. I think that this is when equipment finance was just beginning to discover, oh, we can do stuff without being in person. And
right.
I was just so struck by your forward-thinking insights and fresh ideas and the way that you were leading your team through such a difficult time. And it was the foresight, really, like you were taking actions, I think, before many others. And so you were really like future ready, actually, in contrast to peers. It really stood out. And I still remember it to this day. And just the way you led with empathy as well as foresight, just powerful. And then we recently connected in Chicago at the funding conference. I saw you in the hall, and we geeked out a little bit on AI adoption. And I'm like, we need to have you on the show. So I'm really excited to catch up with you right now. So we're talking about future shaping leadership, and this is something you're living every day. Before we dive into, what you're doing, and just, your leadership style, I would love just a bit of a 30,000 foot view of the type of work that you're leading and the strategic focus behind it.
So I started AP back in the late 90s. So this is before the big, just as the bubble, the kind of technology bubble was happening in 99, 2000, if people remember that, if you're old enough. And that was kind of the bubble around, really around the internet, and then and around data and telecommunications, like broadband and all that kind of stuff at the time that was shaping our worlds. I started the company. I had been in structured financing, like you said before. I was doing these big aircraft, leverage lease deals and rail systems and municipal transit systems, things like that, with these very complicated, structured kind of financings. And that whole that was very dependent on government tax subsidies. We were doing these transactions with Japanese tax subsidies, French, Canadian, US, and all of the tax agencies started talking together, and they kind of figured out that we were basically kind of taking money from the government and putting it into the pockets of airlines and people like that in a way that didn't seem to be very fair. So that was all being kind of shut down around that same time, around the 2000s. So a lot of that was going away. You could see the writing on the wall. And I love the equipment finance business. But I also had basically been kind of like a deal doer, an advisor. And, every year you were kind of starting over, having to, start with, fee income driven, you're kind of living off your last deal kind of thing. And I wanted to build a business where I had recurring revenue, basically. It sounds like a very foreign concept, but it seemed appealing to me. So I started AP with no understanding of the small ticket world, no background in it, but having done the big ticket side. And it was obviously a very different world. I had to get in and really understand debits and credits. I mean, I was my own bookkeeper. I had to stand up a lease accounting system, understand how all the data worked behind that. Started growing the business, and then it got a little more complex, and having to learn how to do SQL queries on my own and like really understand the nuts and bolts of how some of these systems work and things. And that really, from today's world, it still is very helpful that I was having to do that sort of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and we had other people. Doug Houlihan was one of my partners at the time. He's now with the company out of Salt Lake City. But he and some others, I mean, we all kind of rolled up our sleeves and we just like learned it ourselves. And it was that. And the other thing I'll say is that from the very beginning of the company, even when I started kind of almost on my own, so to speak, I always had partners. I mean, both investor partners and people in the company helping me. Like I've always been part of a collaborative experience. And I know from your book, you talk a lot about, how to, not just how important collaboration is, but, how to collaborate. So, I mean, that's something that, I've always enjoyed about business, and I think has helped as well in making sure that I'm never doing it on my own. I'm always have, smart people helping me figure out how to do things. So fast forward to today, we've, as you mentioned before, we've got about, we've grown a lot. We sold our company in 2019 to Tokyo Century Corporation, which is a Japanese publicly traded company. And that really allowed us to grow even more. They've allowed us to stay very independent. We collaborate with them, but in terms of our culture and how our business focus and our strategies, I mean, they've really let us kind of run, and it's given us the capital base to be able to grow a lot. So we've got about 150 employees. We're all over the U.S. We run kind of a traditional small to mid ticket financing business where we're in some industries we're doing end user driven financing. Some it's vendor, some it's OEM driven. It's kind of all over the map depending on exactly what industry we're in. But in general, we're trying to find industries and places that are where we can bring value that's kind of more than just a traditional standard financing, whether it be understanding how the credits work, understanding or bringing other services to that. So that's what really drove us into the fleet management business, because we in some of the markets that we're in, we were not just doing financing, but we were trying to figure out how to find people vehicles and specialty trucks, for example, that are hard to find. We're having to transport them to their door. We've always been very open to bring other services. We're having to lease scanners, for them to use, scan packages or what have you. So having to tie up with technology companies to help, bring that to market. So that has, led us, really into the fleet management business as well, where we're starting with really kind of what you call rental, bringing 1 month to 24 month rental into certain certain markets. And then with that, obviously you have to be able to do DOT compliance, accident management, maintenance, tracking of the assets, checking them in, checking them out, transporting them, storing them, the insurance around all that. It's a very, very complicated animal. And there's not a ton of people who do it. I mean, most of the big names like a Penske or Enterprise or people like that, that's kind of who we compete against mostly. And then there's like a few smaller companies, but it's been very interesting to get into that side of the business. And I guess at the end of the day, I'll stop in one sec, but it kind of gets back to, what you're always looking at, which is kind of the intersection of, bigger strategy for companies versus the day-to-day, what I would call kind of technology grind and operational grind. But, we have a strategy behind what we do. And it actually aligns with our parent company very well because they have basically the same strategy. And it kind of goes back to some things that I've believed for a long time about how the world the business world is working, has been working for a long time, and it really hasn't changed in the last 50 years in terms of how I kind of look at the world. And I'll get into that in a sec. I've been talking a lot. I'll let you.
Well, that was
let you ask any questions about
juicy cliffhanger there. Like, it started to write his fundamental beliefs about how the business world works, and I'm like all ready to take notes, and then you stop. I was getting excited as you were talking because I was seeing that. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so strategic, but also it's not just big picture for your company. You're actually enabling your customers to see a bigger picture and then helping them to achieve it in the way that you're bringing new, not only financing, but services to their world. And that is really intriguing. So what sparked your commitment to the challenges that you're pursuing right now? And you mentioned how this ties to your overall, parent company strategy. So why does that commitment matter to you at that strategic level?
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there's a few things, and I've said this before in with groups and speeches and things that I've given in the past with the ELFA and other industry associations, and it hasn't changed. So I'll just give a couple stories. One is, I was a child in the 1970s, and I remember going to the bank with my mom and my dad, sitting down at whatever it was, First Interstate Bank and them filling out all these forms to apply for a credit card, right? And it was like a 2-month process, for them to eventually get issued a Visa card, right? So, even 30 years ago, you kind of tell that story. And it wasn't the AI world, but it was certainly the data world was starting to really appear. So data was already really happening on a big scale. And even, back 30 years ago, you never, people were like, no way, because you could, go online even a long time ago, go to some major credit card company and apply for credit and get it in a minute, right? So, that, and I would always tell people, it's like, it's coming to equipment finance. Like everybody says, yeah, it's more complicated and we got more, there's more aspects to it. And, you've got vendors and you've got equipment and, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is, even with the complexity, like it's coming, right? So now we're really seeing that, right? Which is basically the commoditization of financing, so, and it's just going to continue to accelerate, with tools and with technology. It was already happening. It's going to accelerate more. So like at the end of the day, it gets back to like looking at any business, whether it's a finance business or you're an auto dealer or you're selling teddy bears. Like what value, what is your value add, right? In the marketplace. And if you're going to go and compete against everybody else and do the same thing, And you better have a very low cost, very efficiently um, distributed and model that is going to be incredibly quick and instant and low cost and give a very low rate. And if you don't do all those things, you're eventually going to be you're not going to be able to compete.
Yeah.
And it is, we're seeing this, it's kind of slow, but it's definitely happening. Like the technology is accelerating.
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, and this is like the disruption story that happens over and over and over again.
yeah,
Slow and then sudden. Slow and then
right.
sudden. So
Exactly.
yeah, I think you're right. Like if you don't think it's coming, think again.
Well, and then the second thing that's a big kind of thing that happened was Amazon, right? And those types of models where you had a bookseller that all of a sudden is doing everything. I mean, right? And in fact, one of my oldest son works for Amazon. He's in their satellite department. Like, okay, so you go from bookselling to like satellites
to outer space,
and you have everything in between with data and technology. And that, and Amazon from the very beginning, even when they were starting to sell books, they were a data play, right? So, so you go back to finance, even dealerships or what have you, like it's all being disrupted. It's happening a little bit slowly with certain things because of laws and things like that, for dealerships, for example, but it's all being disrupted, right? And finance is just one part of that too, like embedded finance and all that, at some point it's like, again, financing is just going to be this, like, it's a technology, right? So, that I've believed that since even when I started the company, how do you differentiate yourself? It's through taking credit risk, or it's through products that you're offering, or residual risk or something like that. But, if and there'll be a few players that are just the most efficient at doing this, that have invested a ton of money into technology to do it super fast, super well, all that kind of stuff. Is that which one of these things is you? And so, I know we're never going to be a huge company. We're never going to be like at the bleeding edge of technology. Anybody who thinks they are is like out of their minds, because we're always actually behind the eight ball to a certain extent.
The edge keeps
we're small,
moving,
like we're
Chris.
all small companies. Yeah, I mean,
yeah, but the
we're
edge keeps moving. How can you be on the cutting edge? We don't even know where that
you
is
can
anymore.
if you're like Microsoft or Google, or if you're spending billions of dollars doing things, versus like, okay, what's our tech spend every year? In the millions.
Well,
Which
yeah,
is still a lot, but it's certainly not like these types of even Chase Bank, JP Morgan. You're not going to invest like they do, right? So we don't have the budgets for it, so you have to be realistic, and you have to really look at what you're doing and what your value add is. And so that's what's really continued to push us to figure out, how to be relevant in 10 years, even with everything that's going on. And it continues to drive me. I mean, we are like a player in a credit, small ticket financing, but I know that it's just going to get more and more competitive, and it can only be one of a number of products that we offer, or eventually we won't compete anymore. And we're already seeing that with returns. Like a lot of institutions are looking at kind of what we do. And if you look at an ROE and an ROA basis, unless you can do something really special, it just doesn't return. And that's what a lot of banks see too. Eventually, it just doesn't have the returns that you need, to especially if you're like a company that's looking for a higher than average return. Banks are happy to live at a 1.2 to 1.5 ROA. But I mean, if you're in private equity, or you're like, we're kind of becoming like a private equity company, Tokyo Century, they're looking for a 3% ROA and a 15+% ROE. So, you have to look at these models as they continue to get more competitive. And eventually, from that perspective as well, you have to be looking at that too in your business model, and and what your parents looking for. If you're privately funded, whatever, maybe you're happy with whatever returns you're getting. But if you're PE backed, or you're backed by a Japanese company like we are, or you're backed by a bank, you really have to look at what the parent longer term is looking to achieve, because otherwise, you may or may not be relevant in that world going
Yeah.
forward.
Well, I love the way that I mean, this is tomorrow's own thinking. Even though you're executing today, you're constantly thinking about the actions that I take now, the decisions that I make now. How does that factor into the long term, the bigger picture and ongoing relevance? And I'm curious, you've been talking a lot about always coming back to how do we add value? How do we add value? Because many of the things you talk about in a finance company are just table stakes. You talked about the rapid pace of commoditization of what we're doing. And I see that all over. But an interesting thing that's happening is that, because you're thinking ahead and you're thinking not only about where are we today and where have we come from, but where are we going, the world is lining up for the type of experience that technology does make possible. And as the cost of tech continues to drive down, I'm curious, what do you see on the horizon as what could be possible for even customer experience?
Right. Yeah. Honestly, I feel like I don't know that I don't have any more crystal ball than anybody else has. Everybody's reading the same stuff. They're looking at the, more or less, maybe they're ahead of the curve, behind the curve, whatever. But at the end of the day, we've been through these things before. The technology, all of this stuff that's changing now, like the, large language models, the way that, you're able to kind of do things so much faster, so much more integrated with, different, putting whatever Copilot into PowerPoint is a very basic example, or, coding like within a second, a new website or whatever.
Mhm.
But that stuff, it's just going to become embedded like in all these major technologies. So being a little bit behind with all that, I'm not too worried about that. And, we're obviously like everybody else playing around with all kinds of different things, but eventually it all becomes just part of what you do on the technology side, and everybody kind of understands it. It becomes more embedded, and we'll all move on beyond that. I think what we all need to look at, from a bigger picture, stepping way back perspective, is again, to the extent that some of these things become really easy to do, like you said, and really much cheaper to achieve, again, your value add. Like if you, we're saying, okay, well, we have an operating equipment finance company that works pretty well. Like that's our value add. It's like, well, that's not going to be good enough in the future. So, but like you said, it has to be things that you have to look at. Everybody talks about moat, right? Like your ability to, have a castle and then have a big moat around it with a lot of water and that's very deep and that has like fire and dragons and all that kind of stuff to keep away competition. So that's like business school 101. So, really what we're trying to do is create moat. And how do you do that with technology that becomes easier and easier? It becomes harder for everybody, right? So we're struggling with that too. I don't know that we're necessarily, if, for example, in 10 years, you could say, okay, give me $100 million in capital, buy me 72 super specialized vehicles, put them out to my clients, create storage lots, get me DOT compliant, figure out accident management, blah, 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 within and click a finger and it's all done. Like there's certain industries and businesses that are, technology is obviously a key part of it, but there's other aspects to those businesses that are physical in nature, that are a little more kind of complex than the standard widget. And they're going to, so that does create moat, we believe. So that's why we're leaning into things that are a little more complex and that are obviously have technology driving them, but are not ultimately just a technology play. And if you look at like what kids today graduating from school, you're seeing more becoming electricians because like until the robots come and can do wiring, like, you need to have electricians. So I think with even finance businesses, you have to look at that kind of stuff. If you're taking big credit risk, for example, I mean, maybe technology is going to enable that a little bit more. But at the end of the day, like, not everybody wants to be a junk credit player in certain markets or what have you. That's moat. I think you're taking big asset risk, asset management risk, all that kind of stuff. That's also that's where our parent is, very big. And we do, we have an aircraft management and leasing company called Aviation Capital Group. We've got CSI Leasing, which is full cycle management with systems. We've got a huge fleet management company in Japan that manages 700,000 vehicles. We've got rental car companies and we own ship companies that have dry bulk shipping and stuff like that. Those are things that, it's not just technology. I mean, there's other aspects to it. So that's, where the company wants us to be, and they want us to be niche focused and in really full asset lifecycle management. And so the direction we're going fits, right into all of that.
That is so cool because, I mean, you mentioned, what's happening with the kids and they're shifting from, in career aspirations from like the bits to atoms. But that's also kind of where there's a lot of value in equipment finance, because as you're, looking at a niche strategy, there are complexities that others might ignore if they're only thinking about just the financing or just the tech. And that's where, pairing your foresight with systems thinking across the ecosystem of that niche to understand, that there's human systems, there's logistics, there's the credit process and system, and then the technology that enables all of it and more, the customer experience and all of that. So many factors that come into play, but it also creates a very delicious problem for your brain to work on.
There's certainly a lot.
Figure all that out. So I'm curious, in all of this work that you've been doing, can you describe a moment when the complexity of this work may have forced you or inspired you to rethink your approach, and what might have changed as a result?
It's funny because I've thought about that sort of a question. And I think, probably most people are like, yeah, this happened. And then, it changed, how I think about everything. I mean, honestly, I've been racking my brain. I'm like, I don't know that I've really changed my approach. I think that it's always the same stuff that comes up, right? You're doing complex things. It's, operation meeting the business needs, meeting the technology needs, data, and it comes back to really having really smart people figuring it out, and then B, how do those people communicate with each other, and how effective is their communication, and then goal setting and all that, and prioritization, and how effective is that, and how well are people following that? And literally before I had this call, I was on a call around, we're building new systems for our fleet business, and it was around it's always the human side. Like, do we have the right technology people that are looking at things the right way? And can those people communicate effectively with the other parts of the team? And does everybody have the right? Are they looking at things in the right way? Are we all speaking the same language? Do we have people in the middle who are just making drama?
Yes.
All that stuff. That's that is, and at AP, we've always had these kind of rules around, behavior. And one of them is go to the source, right? So it's, it goes back to very basic things. We've had the same 11 rules for the last 15 years.
Oh, cool.
And we have them on our wall. They're over there. It's like, number one is attitude is everything. But then there's other things like, we're intellectually curious. Process is the lifeblood of the company. Go to the source, So those things, like literally this morning, we came back to so-and-so is creating drama because the business person and the technology person need to get on the same page. Like the business person has to understand the technology and the data and stuff enough to have a conversation with them. the technology side. The technology person has to understand the business needs enough to like figure, and then they can start talking the same language. And if you don't get on that page, things never work. And then you also just need people leading projects that actually have the EQ and the IQ and all those things. So that has not changed. Like,
oh my gosh. No, amen. I mean, it's interesting, Chris, because as you were talking, what I wrote down is the scenario and the context and the conditions change continually, but the patterns of human behavior,
all the same stuff, right? We went from fax machines to telexes to all this technology changes, all that, the sky's falling. We've been through this before, but at the end of the day, like, it's all back to like, how do humans interact?
Right. It doesn't matter if it's AI or whatever comes after AI, quantum, virtual reality, who knows? Humans are humans, and we don't change at an exponential pace.
Exactly.
I haven't met a human that changes at an exponential pace yet. Some feel like they do, but anyway, different story. But yeah, I mean, these are things that happen over and over again. But, I think the first step is recognizing it so you can do something about it. And I love the way that you're constantly bringing your team back to those 11 principles that are guiding everything that you do. It's so vital. I mean, I can't tell you how many teams and situations I run into where everyone has fantastic, excellent intentions, but when they're not speaking the same language, they don't share the same definition of success or even have a shared understanding of what we're trying to accomplish together and why it matters. It all falls apart, and it doesn't matter how fancy the technology is or how big your tech budget is. Those are definitely the basics. I was, just before I joined you on this call, I was at an event where CEOs it was like a wisdom exchange type of forum for CEOs. And I was listening to it was Kind, Ethan Allen, and Build-A-Bear that we were hearing from. And they all had the same thread as you, like coming back to those basic values and the North Star, and never losing sight of that, no matter what disruptive forces of change are coming at you. And that's the thing that helps you. And even if your moat is continuing to shift and change and morph, sticking to those things is what makes the difference. So I'm just curious, if we could go personal for a moment, what assumption, belief, or leadership habit have you personally had to change in order to make meaningful progress on this?
Oh boy. I mean, it's hard to say because I've actually been, I've been in charge of AP for almost 30 years now. And I don't know how much you're aware of like your own like journey personally. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, again, like, I haven't changed a whole lot, but I've definitely, experience like almost makes you firmer in the beliefs that work, and that are that you have to come back to, like you said, those guiding star type principles. And so it's more of like, when I've had a conversation about one person in the company more than twice about whether they should be with the company anymore, I know that like that person will not last another 6 months. Like those are, just little things like that in the back that you just learn. It's like, if you were having this conversation again about somebody, they're not going to make it. So, let's just deal with that now, right?
Yeah.
That you have to
so
constantly, those types of things, those are like not having to do with technology or innovation. It's just how to run a business. That you have to, you can be friends with somebody, but as the leader of the company, you constantly have to look at, do you have the right team? And you have to adjust that, because things are changing very quickly. And just because you like somebody doesn't mean that they're the right asset for your company.
Yeah. Well, and it was the first thing you brought up.
These are very basic things, right?
Yeah.
And even if it's like they meet our house rules, but they're just, technology has moved them aside, unfortunately. You try to find them a new home or what have you, but there's just kind of brutal realities about running a company that I, those are the hard things to learn. I think firing people is the hardest thing that people who lead companies do.
Yes.
But you have to get over that, unfortunately. So that's, and then just, your gut kind of is the guide about like making all those hard decisions and kind of knowing when, something is just not working. It's just dysfunctional, what have you, having to get everybody in the room, step back, be like, okay, we have got, and you have to do it quickly and you have to do it often. Like, and you're constantly adjusting, kind of the team and effect that you have on the field and the configurations of the team. Those types of things, those are, things that's part of our job. Right. And, I always say, my job is to like not have a job, right? That's the case of any leader, right? Or anybody for that matter.
Can you say
like
a little more about what that means to you? Your job is to not have a job.
That anybody that you should, my job is to put the right people around me so that I can go on vacation every day and it just all runs perfectly. The strategy continues to shift. It's clear and I don't have to do anything, right? I mean, that is what I try to do every day, is to put myself in a position where I can go play golf. Now, in reality, it's not that easy, but I mean, that really should be the CEO's role, because that means that you have all the right people in place. You've got all the right technology in place. You've got the right strategy in place. You're set, right? So, does that ever really happen? No, but if you don't think about that every day, I think you're like, okay, why am I doing the CFO's job today? Why am I doing the chief technology officer's job today? Why am I doing HR's job today? Like, that's not my job. My job is to do nothing. Like, and I joke about that, but that's kind of what, I always kind of get back to, right? So I don't know. Those are a few things that I don't know that they're anything major, but it's more about just becoming a better boss and a more decisive boss. You still have to have empathy and all that, but you also just, I think as you get more seasoned, you don't put up with with like dysfunction shouldn't be putting up with dysfunction
right.
at all.
Well, I have found over the years that my tolerance for dysfunction has decreased considerably. But what I'm hearing through all of this, though, is you're very grounded in your guiding principles, but you relentlessly protect your culture. Culture drives innovation,
absolutely.
And innovation drives culture. And so I think,
And if you don't, and Tony Golobic was the one who put me onto the rules. They call them, covenants, they're from the Midwest, but he was like, if you don't have rules or covenants or whatever you want to call them around everything you do, then you have no culture. If you have no culture, you've got no company. Because I remember he showed up to an event, and I can't remember what it was exactly. It was a small panel, and he was going to talk about, his everything he knows about business kind of thing. I'm like, oh, he's going to talk about the KPIs and the markets and all that kind of stuff. And he's like, I'm going to sit here and talk to you for an hour about culture, because if you don't have culture, you've got nothing. And you know what? It was the best presentation I'd ever seen, because it stuck with us, and we changed the way that our company operated. And it is still transformational for us, and it works. And he's like, look, you need your own, here's my rules, but don't take that. Like, everybody has to have their own. Every culture has to be different. You need to figure out your own rules, and you have to do it, with all levels, have to buy in, and then you have to enforce it. Because if you don't enforce it, you have no culture.
That's the key right there. Just the reinforcing, and that's how you're proving that you're sticking to it. But I mean, I can see that in all the stories that you've shared, and that's just powerful. So last question before we jump into the lightning round. As you look ahead, Chris, what feels most critical to get right next to maintain that long-term relevance?
Oh my gosh. I mean, honestly, like the reality is you have to get almost all of it right. You have to get the strategic direction. You've got to get the people. You've got to get the technology, the data strategy. Like, you have to get it all right, or you're going to fail. And you might stumble at certain levels with certain things, but I mean, honestly, it's, everything's so competitive. I mean, you can't fail any of them,
Yeah, it's holistic. It's a system.
Yeah.
Well, this has been such a fun conversation. I have prepared a few questions for you. This is the lightning round, so I'm just looking for, quick responses, no overthinking. So this should be easy for you. Fill in the blank. Long-term relevance requires blank.
Really a great strategy and sticking to it.
Awesome. In one word, what word best describes what this work has demanded of you personally?
I mean, really have to be all in, personally, and your family has to be part of that. Um, it's not something you can kind of do 9 to 5. It's a labor of love.
That's so awesome. What's a signal or a shift that you believe other leaders might be underestimating right now?
I think people tend to look at shiny objects, maybe sometimes a little too much, and forget about back to the basics of your strategy and your moat and all that kind of stuff. So especially in the U.S., it's interesting because in Japan, you just don't, people talk about AI and all the things going on, but it's not as dominating of a conversation. I think they're looking at, kind of the long-term strategy a little bit more. So maybe just, back to kind of stepping back and being like, okay, all this stuff is going to, it's be there, it'll change, it'll morph, whatever. But, do you really have the right strategy in place for the long time? Back to the same thing.
Yeah, so good. All right, final question. So you've shared a lot about your journey and where you're going. Looking back, what do you wish someone would have told you before you started all this?
Put everything into the Mag 7 that you have 10 years ago. Just and leverage yourself to the hilt and just go all in.
So good. All in. Well, Chris, it has been so fun chatting with you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Deb. Yeah, it's really an honor to be here, and appreciate the conversation.
To our listeners, if you're serious about shaping the future inside your organization, I encourage you to check out my new book, Enter the Tomorrow Zone. If it sparks ideas or gaps worth exploring, reach out to us, tomorrowzone.io. We would welcome the conversation. Thanks again for listening. We encourage you to like, subscribe, share if you find value here. And as always, stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.